Hi students, I'm Jeanette Loxo, speech language pathologist at Valencia High School.
I'm Amanda Dykstra, a speech language pathologist at George Key School.
And I'm Heather Taylor. I'm a graduate student intern from Chapman University.
And today we're going to talk about AAC and the 4 most important components of effective intervention for AAC. We're going to talk about what AAC is and how to implement it appropriately. So, the first part of the presentation is what we're going to learn. We're going to learn what AAC is, what it stands for, what it means, who uses it, the different types of AAC and why it's important, and including the best practices for teaching AAC.
So AAC means augmentative and alternative communication. So augmentative is supplementing verbal speech, and alternative is instead of verbal speech. And you kind of do, Jeanette, you do a good job of explaining that.
So when we have an augmentative communication system, that means that the student communicates verbally and then also uses the AAC when the verbal speech isn't quite enough or they need some additional support. So what that could look like is they could communicate verbally like, hi, how are, and then get their device and type you. Or it could look like it could alternate on different days. One day they're having a harder day, need to use their AAC system all day long. Another day they need to use verbal speech and their AAC system. It just kind of depends on the student. And then alternative communication is only using their AAC system. So they don't have any form of verbal speech at all, and all they're using to communicate is their system. So that's why we have kind of both, because it does vary.
Yeah. And for augmentative too, for some students who have reduced intelligibility, I have some students who have Down syndrome who there's certain words that are hard for communication partners to understand. So if they're having trouble communicating with someone, they'll utilize an AAC system for just specific words so that their communication partner, whoever they're talking to, can understand them. Perfect. So it's just in addition to what they're saying verbally.
And we'll have a nice little video about what AAC is.
Augmentative and alternative communication, also known as AAC, is a way for an individual to communicate when they do not have the physical ability to use verbal speech or writing. AAC systems are designed to help people express their thoughts, needs, wants, and ideas. AAC can range from a simple set of picture symbols on a communication board up to a computer system that is programmed to speak with words or messages. AAC might be a temporary system that is used while a child's speech and language are developing, or might be the individual's primary means of communication for a lifetime. AAC is used by those with a wide range of speech and language impairments. Common causes for severe speech disability include congenital conditions such as cerebral palsy and autism. Also, many people acquire conditions that result in the loss of speech. Some common examples include amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or Lou Gehrig's disease, head injuries, and Parkinson's disease. AAC can help people who are not able to talk at all. It can also be a helpful strategy if a child is talking but is difficult to understand. The use of AAC strategies can help children improve their ability to interact with others and to communicate better at home, at school, and in the community. Using AAC can also help decrease inappropriate behaviors, such as crying or tantrums, that are often due to the child's difficulty with communication. There are a wide variety of ways that people access AAC. Access is the way an individual makes selections on a communication board or speech-generating device. Some of the access methods used for AAC include direct selection by pointing or reaching, scanning using a...
So most of the students that I see use direct selection. That just means they use their finger or their hand to touch the button and then it activates and makes the sound. And I know, Amanda, a lot of your students use scanning or the other methods of access.
Yeah, so a lot of my students utilize switches. which is an indirect way of utilizing vocabulary. So we'll have pictures of the core vocabulary word we're targeting, and then they'll hit the switch to utilize whatever core word we're using.
A switch connected to a device, head pointing, and eye control. Selecting the best way to communicate can be a complex process. It's important to get an evaluation by a group of professionals who are qualified to evaluate the necessary skills to use an AAC system successfully.
And that would be the IEP team, including a speech language pathologist.
An evaluation should involve a team of professionals working together. In addition to the AAC user and his or her family and caregivers, this team often includes a speech language pathologist, a physician, an occupational therapist, or physical therapist.
And in the school setting, it wouldn't be a physician, it would just be the IEP team.
One more thing to add about that. So physician, although technically they're not part of the team per se, the AAC team, sometimes we require like forms from a physician. Like a lot of times I have to get eye gaze vision records from physicians, that type of thing. So medical records are sometimes important. So we utilize physicians occasionally for that.
So Miss Heather is going to talk about this one.
Okay, so there are a lot of different types of AAC. I think a lot of people automatically think like iPads or eye gaze systems, but there's actually quite a range. So there's ones that require no technology. So the no tech devices don't require any extra equipment. You would use pointing, gestures, facial expressions, or sign language. A low tech device would not require a battery or anything. So like picture symbol books, writing, alphabet boards, a communication board like Jeanette has right there with the core words. And then you can also have a high tech system. So those that are on iPads or use eye gaze that require technology.
So we want to know who uses an AAC system. So any student or child that cannot meet their daily needs with their spoken language alone. And so if someone isn't able to functionally communicate just with their oral speech, then they may benefit from AAC. And like we talked about, this includes people who can communicate verbally, but may just be very difficult to understand or have low intelligibility.
And we just want to point out too that communication is a fundamental human right. So that's something that speech therapists, we advocate for. You know, just because someone doesn't have a voice or isn't able to use their voice doesn't mean they don't have something to say. So that's kind of a really important thing to remember.
And so AAC best practices. So these are like the highest recommendation things that are important. So first is access. You want to make sure that the system or the communication board or whatever it is that you're using is accessible at all times. So you want to make sure that the child carries it with them from room to room, or if it's like a core board, you have it in multiple spots around your home. Another important thing is modeling. So just as when a little child is learning to speak for the first time, like we model words for them. So you want to do the same thing with AAC. So whether that's a dynamic device like on an iPad or like a core vocabulary board, you want to point and say the words so that you're modeling your speech on the device for them to learn. Another important thing is core vocabulary. So core vocabulary are like the most commonly used words in the English language. So these are really useful words like on these nice boards for kids or students to use that would work for a variety of different topics. They're not specific to just school or just home. They work in all kinds of situations. And the fourth one is communication opportunities. So you want to try to plan specific opportunities for communication throughout the day. And a really good way to do that is through routines. So whether that's like mealtime routine or getting ready for bed, you really want to incorporate communication into those daily routines.
Beautiful. So now we're going to go into a little bit more in depth in those 4 important pieces of implementation. And the first one's going to be access. So part of that is making sure that the system is out at all times. If the child uses AAC, it's their voice and it shouldn't ever be taken away. So if you're ever tempted to take an AAC system away, ask yourself, would you take this away if the child were verbal? So if a child was communicating, would you take their voice away? And the answer is usually no.
And something I want to add about that too, because especially at George Key, I have some students who have iPads or eye gaze devices, and I know that sometimes it gets frustrating for maybe the classroom teacher or even a parent if the student continually, stims on a word. So if they're repeating a word, during times where they really should be quiet, what I tell parents and teachers to do is to treat it like it's a behavior rather than that they're just interrupting, because I know a lot of people are really tempted to just take away their device. And a lot of times when that happens, I see students, go an hour or 2 without their device. So instead of doing that, I would just say treat it like a behavior. So I tell a lot of teachers to say, you have 3 chances, and then if the student interrupts 3 times, they lose their volume. So I never actually take their device away. I just turn the volume down. So they still have access to their system, but it's not disrupting the class at that point.
And that's a really good point, Amanda. Another thing, I have a lot of students as well who use their device in class or perseverate on one specific word, or I have one or a couple of students who use their device to kind of gossip in class. And those are all behaviors. It's a positive thing for our students to use their device in ways that typical children would use their voice, like to disrupt the class or to gossip or, have those behaviors that are not appropriate for the classroom, but are age appropriate. And so we don't want to take away the device to discourage age appropriate behaviors. We just want to modify them and teach them that this is not the right time for that behavior. Another strategy is having a picture symbol that says quiet and placing it on the device. Like, okay, right now it's quiet time. Your job is to pay attention to the teacher. That way they still have their device, but there's kind of that behavioral modification of the communication behavior. Okay.
Okay, so the second one is modeling, and this one is extremely, extremely important. So modeling using AAC means that you use the communication system while you talk to show how it can be used. So if you think about a verbal communicator, especially if you have other kids, when you think about a baby learning to talk, when a baby's learning, they're looking at their mom's mouth. And they're not necessarily, processing, okay, when my tongue goes here, I produce this sound. But over time, they watch our mouth movements, they hear our words, they see the meaning behind it, and over time, they start to coordinate all those messages into learning how to communicate verbally. So it's the same for AAC users. We want to make sure that we're modeling exactly how we want them to communicate. So just speaking to them orally is not going to be helpful for them, because we can model all day long and they're not going to be able to physically utilize their mouth to communicate. So we want to make sure that when we're talking to them, we're using their AAC system. So for example, if I'm using one of these core boards, I'm actually pointing when I say something. So, oh, mommy wants some cereal. So I'm pointing to it. I'm using it as I'm saying it. And then over time, this will help the student learn how to use their AAC system functionally for their own use.
And then we have a video that also explains that really nicely. So that's similar to what Amanda said. Typical children learn language by their parents modeling language orally.
So can you pause it a second?
Yeah.
So so it says at the bottom, speaking to Josie did not work as a model for teaching her how to communicate because she did not learn to speak over time. So this can be due to many different things, and it's different for each person. So for some kids, they might have an apraxia of speech, meaning the messages in their brain aren't being sent correctly to the muscles in their mouth. So for instance, the message in their brain is saying, I want to say more, but that message isn't getting all the way to the lips to produce the word more, if that makes sense. So there's many different reasons why a child won't learn to speak, but that's just a reason.
So I like how this video shows that the parents are modeling on the device, but also the sibling. And this could be applicable for friends as well. I really like that. I think that's important that not just one person is modeling, that the whole family is modeling on the child's device. Sorry. And also I want parents and anyone who's watching to notice that in this example, parents are modeling and not demanding the child to use their device to communicate. They're just modeling, and then the child is naturally going to the device to use those words that they're seeing. That's a really, really important component of AAC. We want their language to come naturally and in a positive way.
Yeah, so going off of that, exposing them to vocabulary is very, very important. Because when you think about a baby developing, you're not expecting them to produce sentences, but you are still modeling, short phrases and sentences. You are still talking to the baby, but you're only expecting them to, produce the words that they know. Yeah. So it's the same with AAC.
So, let's see see. I think the next one was for Heather.
Sure, yeah, and then just one more quick thing to add about modeling. I think sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, especially with like the dynamic devices, like how to find words, and you're like, I don't know where everything is. So I think especially for parents, or sometimes it can be overwhelming. So I think it's important to also model like how to search for words, or let the child know, like, I don't know where it is either, like let's
Yeah.
find it together, so that they don't feel like they have to have mastery of this system. Like you can show them it's okay, like we'll learn together, and how to kind of troubleshoot that by searching or different things like that.
That's a really
Okay, so this slide says by 18 months, babies have heard 4,380 hours of spoken language, and we don't expect them to be fluent yet. If AAC learners are only see symbols modeled twice weekly for 20 to 30 minutes, for example, in like a speech therapy session, it would take them 84 years for them to have the same exposure to aided language as an 18-month-old has to spoken language. So I think this quote is really important, just to realize how our expectations should change in a way that it is really important to model that language for them, because you can't expect them to just compensate on their own for all of that input that they're not getting if you just leave it like the twice a week 20 to 30 minute sessions. Like it's not fair to expect them to, you know, start running before they walk. So they really need that model as much as possible.
And then the third component is core vocabulary. So core vocabulary is a small set of words that make up 80% of what we say day to day. And like Heather said, core vocabulary isn't specific, it's generic. So it's vocabulary words that can be used in multiple settings for multiple purposes. So for example, go, that can be used all day long. We're going to go to the store. We're going to get up and go downstairs. I want to go over here. And it's my turn to go. Those are kind of all different sentences that use that one core vocabulary word. And so you get, I like to say, you get a lot of bang for your buck if you teach them that one word, and that word is a core vocabulary word. They can use it for so many different purposes and in so many different settings, versus focusing on specific nouns. Pizza, there's only one setting where you can say the word pizza. And a lot of parents and different providers do try to focus on, well, I want them to be able to ask for what they want, and so let's focus on those specific nouns. And yes, we want kids to ask for what they want, but it's so limiting to learn those very, very specific nouns like pizza or orange juice. We want core vocabulary to help children communicate all the time. You can use core vocabulary to request what you want. So for example, that would be a perfect example of a core vocabulary word to request. You would say, I want that, and then point to the one that you want. So here's some of the top words that can be used by most people. I, here, out, off, yes, help, no, a, want, the, is, it, go, you, my, in, that, on, more, and what. Those are just some examples of some core vocabulary words. Notice that none of them are specific nouns. They're generic words. So, here's those ones. We don't need to do that one, but here's an example of a core vocabulary board. And Amanda, you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is the core vocabulary board. This is what we call a static board. So a static word means that it remains obviously static, so it doesn't move. It's not a dynamic display like an iPad, for instance. So an iPad, when you hit a button, the screen changes or it produces, a sound. So this would be an example of a static board, so it's not actually moving. But this is really helpful because it's using all these core vocabulary words where you can use these all day long. You can model them in tons of different settings. So you can be pointing to them as you know, when you go to the store, we're gonna go, and so I'm pointing to the word go, we're gonna go to the store, and then, you know, I want to eat a hot dog. You know, when you go to, as soon as you go to Costco, I want to eat a hot dog. See, look at all the people. So you're modeling these words as you're communicating with your student. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Perfect. So you're pointing to the words as you're communicating with them. So we're going to go to Costco. Okay, we're going to eat a hot dog. Oh, look, see the customers. So you're modeling these words as you're talking to your child, and then over time your child's gonna start learning these words and what they mean, and they're gonna be able to understand them, and they're gonna be able to use them. And like Jeanette was explaining, these are very versatile words, so you can use them in a variety of settings and a variety of situations. They're not limiting.
Right.
Okay,
there.
so now we're going to talk about communication opportunities. Okay, so there are only 4 reasons why people communicate. They either want to express their wants and needs, they want to get information or share information, building relationships, or engaging in social etiquette. So it's important to try to create opportunities to practice all of these. I think with AAC, a lot of times it's easiest to work on number 1, expressing the wants and needs, and like, I want this and I want that, and that can be really useful. But it's also important to, especially if the child is interested in building, you know, those social relationships, really incorporate the AAC in those opportunities as well. And social etiquette, like saying please and thank you, getting and sharing information so that they can tell you things that, you know, they saw or that happened to them. I think those are all really important things to target in addition to the wants and needs.
And if you kind of go back to the video we made last week, just about developmental milestones, it's important to always keep that in mind as well. So where your child is in their communication development, because all 4 of these reasons have different complexities, I would say. So expressing wants and needs is typically, you know, a lot easier for students. So, you know, requesting the toy that they want, requesting the food that they want is a lot easier and more motivating for them than maybe engaging in social etiquette. So saying please and thank you, hello, goodbye. So it's important to focus on what's motivating for your child and also where they are developmentally.
And depending on the developmental level, sometimes some kids are going to hang out at the expressing their wants and needs for years and years, and that's okay because that's their developmental level, and that's the function of communication that they can access that really helps them access the bulk of their communication. And other students who are developmentally more advanced might start to branch out into getting and sharing information and the other reasons for communicating. So that's another important reason why having a speech language pathologist work with a child who uses AAC is so important, because we're the ones who are aware of all of those developmental levels, and that's really how we make those decisions on what goals we want to focus on and target.
Yeah, and the student might not always have access to everything. So I have some students who they only, on their iPad, they only have their wants and needs on there. So they only have food items, they only have toys. They don't have any icons that say please, thank you, those types of words, because they just haven't reached that level of communication yet. So that doesn't mean that they can't get there someday. It just means that we haven't gotten there yet. So for some of my students, they don't have those icons, or we've hidden those icons so that they can really focus on the words that they do have, and then they can master those and generalize those across different settings and with different people before we start working on these other areas of communication.
And I like to explain that and kind of correlate it to math. So a lot of parents or families are wanting, I want all of the icons, because what if there's something that my child might want to say and then can't say it? And that's a valid kind of thought, but we have to think about, okay, if my child is just learning to add numbers, we don't want to give them a graphing calculator with a ton of symbols and numbers and really high level complex buttons, because that's really overwhelming, and then adding is going to become even harder. And so we want to match the AAC system to that child's level. And so I like to kind of compare it to math. We don't want to teach our kid calculus if they haven't started learning to add numbers yet. So the next part is research has shown that AAC users need at least 200 communication opportunities every single day in order to learn to use their systems well. And so that is one of the reasons why a lot of our speech and language sessions are push-in sessions, because it's helpful for the SLP to train the teacher and the aides in the classroom to provide all of those communication opportunities on top of what we provide with just the speech and language sessions, because it's just not enough communication opportunities with the amount that we see them. It needs to be at home and in the classroom and in every single setting. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, so when we're talking about communication opportunities, it also depends on, again, like what level of communication that the child has reached. So for instance, if they don't have a system for requesting, you're not going to make them request their food.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a way to request their food. But as soon as they do, if they have a picture system, or if they have a scanning system or a switch system that says, Cheez-Its, now we want to have that be a communication opportunity. So now lunchtime, instead of it just being a daily routine, now lunchtime is a communication opportunity. So it's a chance for that child to communicate, I want Cheez-Its, or I want sandwich, or whatever it is. That has become a communication opportunity rather than just a daily routine. But it's important, obviously, you wouldn't have a student request, their lunch if they don't have a feasible way to do it. But as soon as they do, we want to make sure that we're creating those opportunities for them to use their systems functionally to get their needs met, and to communicate all 4 of those items that we talked about in the previous slide.
And one example of a very simple way you can create a communication opportunity is called a communication temptation. And that's a great way. SLPs do that with typical language development as well as with AAC. And Amanda and Heather kind of talked about, like, for example, if it's a Cheez-It and you already know that the child has the ability to touch the want symbol on their device, and they want the Cheez-It, that's a skill that they have, that they've learned. You can have the Cheez-It there and kind of look at them and wait and give them a chance to really process and think about it. Okay, wait, there's a word that I know that can get me what I want. Oh yeah, want. And then you give them the Cheez-It. And so that's something really simple that all parents and teachers and aides can do if they know the child has the ability to ask for that.
And that's where modeling comes in too. So when you're just starting to teach your child a word, modeling is going to be really important, because they don't know, at the very beginning, they're not going to know that if they say want, if they touch the word want, they get a Cheez-It. So that's where modeling comes in, where, for a few weeks, months, however long it takes, you're going to model pointing to want, and then immediately give them a Cheez-It. And then over time, like Jeanette was saying, providing them with those tempting opportunities, where if they have that function of communication, they know that, oh, okay, I can use this word want to request the Cheez-It or whatever I want.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be food. It can be a hug, or it can be tickling, or a bubble, or anything that they want. And this kind of goes back to the math analogy. Having a communication device doesn't make you an effective communicator any more than having a piano makes you a musician. We have to teach the communication system to the child and build it into their day, their daily routine, and model all the time.
Yeah, so kind of going back to what Jeanette was saying about the calculator, you know, if you gave someone in the second grade a graphic, or what are they called, graphing calculator, they're not going to all of a sudden be able to do algebra and all these really advanced math equations. So same with a piano, you know, if you give just a random person on a street a piano, that's not going to make them a pianist. So if you're teaching someone piano, you know, you have to teach them the notes first. Then you have to teach them to read notes on the, you know, on a sheet of paper. So it's all about going in steps and stages. So going back to what Jeanette was saying about giving a student like an iPad, for instance, with 100 words on it might be overwhelming for a child who only has 2 words in their vocabulary. So you want to teach it in stages so that it's, 1, not overwhelming, but 2, that they're actually able to effectively master the stage and the level that they're at.
Me? Okay. So in summary, we want to make sure that the AAC system is available at all times. So that means if it's an iPad, it needs to be charged, it needs to be in the room with the student. If it's a paper communication board, have it available, ready to use at all times. You definitely want to model language on the system. So like we talked about, using pointing or touching the buttons on the device as you speak it verbally as well. And you want to focus on the core vocabulary, the ones that will be generalizable to all kinds of different situations and not the super specific nouns. And then you want to set up as many meaningful communication opportunities as possible. So like we said, during routines, whether that be mealtime or just any time throughout your day that you can work in a quick, like maybe target one like core vocabulary word a day. So like today we're going to work on go, and every time we move to a different room or we go out shopping or we go here, we go there, I'm going to focus on the word go so that the child really gets inundated with that core word.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or Amanda, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.